Welcome, friends, to Sourcing Hardware special video interview series. I have with me Professor Anil Sood, who is co-founder of Institute for Advanced Studies in Complex Choices. This is a very amazing and fascinating discipline which has large-scale positive implications in one's life, in corporate sector, as well as in public policy and governance. Professor Sood is also an expert in real estate, economy, and trade. So, to talk this wide range of issues, let's go to Professor Sood to discuss this, intriguing body of study. Professor Sood, welcome to Sourcing Hardware.
Thank you, Mranmay. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be with you and with your team and the audience and your.
Your
Thank you.
institute was established, the institute called the Institute for Advanced Studies in Complex Choices. It was established in 2017, and behind the screen, you have been working for 3 preceding years in 2017. So please tell us what this discipline all about and how these studies is beneficial for for corporate sector as well as for public policy.
Right. Institute is it is indeed 3 years old, but the work we started or thinking about the idea of setting up the institute came up somewhere around 2013-14, and the final decision was taken somewhere in December 2016, and 17 is when we set up the institute.
Okay.
And the genesis was in one of my classrooms.
Okay.
The idea of investing energy in research and education of specific kind, which is not typically a master's program or a research program, came in because we wanted to work with our audience, which is professional managers and people like you and me, who come from various backgrounds and various disciplines. But today, our everyday life, we hear a lot of narratives around economics, and not all of us come from the economic background, and therefore, technically, we don't relate to economics. But if we look at our decisions we make or choices we make, a lot of them are grounded in economics. Right? So that's how the initial thinking started. And that was in one of my classrooms, as I mentioned. I was teaching in Singapore, and it was one of the large global companies and middle to senior level managers of this company. We were working together on finance. I was teaching finance to these guys, and finance from business perspective. And when you teach finance from business perspective, economics naturally comes into play, and strategy also comes into play fairly quickly. Because finance is grounded in strategy and strategy is grounded in economics. That's how I learned over the years during my college days, as well as my working as a teacher and as a manager. So what you realized that time was this was post global financial crisis. So global economy had recovered at that stage. So we were coasting along with lower growth rate, but not bad state to be in. But most people seem to be concerned about saying what's likely to happen in future. So which was really, are we going to go back to global growth rates of close to 5%, which we had pre-global financial crisis? Are we ever going to go back, or how much time will take for us to go back? And what you realize those days, the narrative was saying, no, we're not likely to go back, or we're not expected to go back to those growth rates. And things are not going to improve so easily. Whereas my belief was that global population, if I look at, we are 7 billion people, and the vast majority of all of us are hardworking. We are willing to invest in ourselves, and we are willing to invest in our families and our children all the time. and work to make sure that all of us get better life, families get better life, children get better life, our parents, we provide them better life. So there's no reason why growth won't happen, right? So you can safely say, my argument has been saying, we can safely say growth will happen. Nothing can stop growth from happening. And particularly emerging markets, growth will happen faster than, let's say, developed markets. But even developed markets, the growth will continue to happen. The question is, what kind of cycles are we going to deal with, right? And a large amount of these cycles are function of investments we make. Investments we make as individuals, investments we make as corporate officers or managers, and investments we make as public policy or public officers, which is government officers. So the key to growth is the investment decisions we make and the consumption decisions we make. And investment decisions of individuals are linked to corporate investment decisions. Investment decision of corporations are linked to individual as well as the government investment decisions. Right. So that's how the complexity builds into our decision making or in our choices, because there's a very high degree of interdependence among individual decisions, corporate decision, which is we as managers make, and public policy decisions we as public policy executive, which is civil service or political leadership makes. So the moment we identified that there is a complexity and interdependence in investment and consumption decisions, that's how the name came about. Saying if these decisions are interdependent, we should study these decisions outside the discipline of finance, outside the discipline of economics, outside the discipline of public policy, but specifically look at those decisions. For example, my decision to buy a automobile or a car or a two-wheeler is function of what kind of availability do I have for, let's say, public transport. If I have a good quality public transport available, then need for buying a private vehicle declines, right? So if the government chooses to invest ahead of demand for personal transportation in the economy, then private investment, which could go into a two-wheeler or a car, can be directed to something else. I can direct that investment to education. I can direct that investment to even raising my standard of living elsewhere. Because we all know, by like all studies always tell us, saying it is cheaper to have public transport from a long-term economic perspective than have private transport, right? So therefore, it makes sense to invest in public transport and not encourage people to buy private transport. But if we have automobile and if we want to generate employment, automobile industry is one of the most employment intensive industry,
Yes.
right? So therefore, you would need to encourage private transport, right? Because otherwise, the automobile industry really won't grow. So how do you make this trade-off? Should I encourage private transport? Should I encourage public transport? And how do I generate employment if I'm encouraging public transport? Because the automobile industry is a short cycle industry. It takes very little time to set up an assembly unit today, right? So those are the decisions we want to really study and make a choice which is economically and socially useful from a long term perspective. In short run, when if I find a job and I need transport to go to my office, obviously my first preference will be if I can buy a vehicle, if
Okay.
public transport is not good, right? So that's how the genesis of the institute and the kind of studies we want to do and how we want to approach this whole problem of decision making came about.
Uh, have you consulted any corporate sector? Can you give us some anecdotes or example?
Our board, if you must have seen our members on the board, they are from all three walks of life. They are members from public policy context, they are members from corporate context, largely corporate,
Hmm.
and from the academic world. So, in fact, after initial thinking, all of us got together as professionals
Hmm.
and started looking at these issues, saying, okay, how do we address this issue? and then sort of bring in more and more people into our conversations, so that we start influencing simultaneously even before we start our research programs in full swing. So we did consult corporate officers, very senior corporate leaders. They are
Mhm.
on our board, and we actively engage with the board members.
So, those corporates who are in your board, you consult with only them or beyond that?
No, beyond that, of course, we have started to build a network of close to 200 professionals,
Okay.
where we share our research even before it's published,
Okay.
and we have conversations with them in terms of saying what kind of research should we undertake, what kind of projects should we undertake. So there's continuous dialogue with about 200 to 250 professionals at
Okay.
different levels of responsibilities, very senior level as well as middle and younger business leaders and professionals both.
Can you share with us any any example, like what differences have you made to a corporate corporate organization with your studies?
Uh, One area where we've been able to bring fairly significant focus
Okay.
is on productivity, and the second area is in terms of value for customer. So these
Okay.
are two areas where we specifically brought in focus in the corporate context,
Hmm.
saying how do we improve productivity by improving effectiveness of our expenditure.
Okay.
Uh, we conventionally we distinguish always between what is efficiency and what is effectiveness, right? And but if the focus on effectiveness in everyday life has we have observed that is generally low. Most organizations, big or small, do very well in managing efficiency,
Hmm.
but most organizations struggle to manage effectiveness. And when I say effectiveness, it means saying the spending which I am doing today, does it benefit my customer? So the question really, when we talk about effectiveness, is whatever we are spending today,
Hmm.
how will it benefit my customers, right? So if the expenditure doesn't benefit my customer, I should evaluate that expenditure and see if it is necessary to incur that expenditure or not, right?
Okay.
Because then your ability to deliver what the customer needs increases, and also you're able to price for value. Because if I'm spending the money and the customer doesn't see value in it, the
Hmm.
money I'm spending, then the customer will also not be willing to pay the required price, right? Then you get into discounting, then you get into price based competition, which is really a downward spiral.
Okay. Can you
So
name
that's,
a few
yeah.
corporates with whom you have worked?
That will be a little tricky. I can give you names in organizations we have worked together, but in terms of specifically saying what projects we did with what kind of organization, that will be, I think that will not be right. That's
Okay.
because
Do you
obviously
sign any kind of agreement, non-disclosure?
all all organizations we have an NDA,
Okay.
because you get to know a lot of their conversations, their strategy.
So
But
without
I can, yeah,
Can you elaborate, can you elucidate your point without naming any name, any
right,
organization, but discussing area or scope of improvement?
right. Let me just take an example from a healthcare context.
Okay.
Right. Healthcare, it's an hospital example.
Okay.
It's a large medical equipment supplier, global medical equipment supplier. That's the uh, organization we're really talking about. Now, this supplier obviously is a premium supplier. There's a global supplier who's a premium supplier, and professionals, which is doctors, like their products. But
Okay.
since they are a premium supplier, the hospital always struggles to balance. Saying hospital also has to look at saying what's my cost of surgery or cost of treatment. If I buy from a premium supplier, how many of my patients will be able to afford? And if I can't charge it to the patient,
Hmm.
then I have to give away my margins. So that's a trade-off any healthcare institution has to make. Right now, this supplier obviously is a premium supplier.
Hmm.
Right, so they invest in R&D, they invest in training, they invest in quality of equipment, all that they do very well. So naturally, the price will be 10 to 15% higher. So
Okay.
what you started looking at that situation was saying not only hospital is looking for good quality equipment, right, or advanced technology equipment, there are a lot of managerial issues the hospital faces. For example, in hospital, particularly on consumables, one of the challenges is inventory management, right? Because how much stock do you carry of different consumables? How much of stock do you carry of consumables related to particular equipment? So this particular organization identified that as a problem, saying this is the issue which the hospital faces. So they went beyond the sale of equipment or supply of equipment, saying we'll help you manage inventory because
Okay.
that's one of your biggest issue. Because we know how to manage our supply chain well,
Hmm.
right? So same knowledge which I have in my organization, I'll pass on to your organization,
Okay.
right? So that's how the idea of creating value beyond your own supplies came through.
Okay.
And then obviously hospitals start saving money. They don't really worry about saying we are paying a premium to this particular organization.
Okay. You must have also worked in the, in the public domain. When I say public domain, that means, in the field of governance and public policy. So
That's right.
any differences your researchers have made in that sector? Have you worked with any department, government department, ministry?
We worked in the energy ministry. This was some time ago.
Okay.
In terms of uh, one of our renewable energy programs,
Okay.
I worked personally on that renewable energy program, and this was a finance problem to solve. So this wasn't really a business problem to solve or a productivity problem to solve.
Okay.
And we introduced the whole idea of discounted value of subsidy. How do you rationalize subsidies by using discounted values rather than just looking at the nominal values? So this was one of those very critical tool that we brought into discussions and brought into implementation in terms of deciding how should subsidy levels be determined for renewable energy, a particular segment.
Okay.
So that was an interesting experience because you're bringing new knowledge to application in the government context.
Mhm. Okay. So is much of your work related to uh, dissecting the decisions which have been already made, or it is for the decision to be taken?
It typically turns out both ways. So what
Okay.
you do is your initial conversation is always forward looking,
Okay.
saying if we want to grow or if we want our profitability to get better, how
Hmm.
do we grow our business and how do we grow our profitability? That's how a typical question comes in.
Okay.
Uh, it's in either teaching context when you're saying, okay, how do I build capability among the leadership team or among the management team to help them grow the business and help them grow the profitability of the business. But in order to look forward, you also start trying, you try understanding what is the current state, right? So what kind of a growth company has achieved so far, or
Hmm.
which market is growing, which market is not growing, which products or services are profitable, which product services are not profitable, why they're not profitable. So ask those questions, then you start looking forward, saying if this growth level has to change to a higher trajectory, what is that you would need to do in those situations?
Okay.
So does it need a geographical expansion? Does it need a product or a services portfolio or a solution portfolio to be expanded? Does it need in terms of finding new customers or new both ways? So what
Okay.
you do is your initial conversation is always forward looking,
Okay.
saying if we want to grow or if we want our profitability to get better, how
Hmm.
do we grow our business and how do we grow our profitability? That's how a typical question comes in.
Okay.
uh, it's in either teaching context when you're saying, okay, how do I build capability among the leadership team or among the management team to help them grow the business and help them grow the profitability of the business. But in order to look forward, you also start trying, you try understanding what is the current state, right? So what kind of a growth company has achieved so far, or
Mm.
which market is growing, which market is not growing, which products or services are profitable, which product services are not profitable, why they're not profitable. So ask those questions, then you start looking forward, saying if this growth level has to change to a higher trajectory, what is that you would need to do in those situations?
Okay.
So does it need a geographical extension? Does it need a product or a services portfolio or a solution portfolio to be expanded? Does it need in terms of finding new customers or new segments? So that's how you start looking at from current to the forward to the future. Primary research commissioned for a particular organization, you look at what insights they have or what data they have, generate insights from them, and
Okay.
then collaborate it with public domain research, which is available through industry associations or industry analysts and organizations like that.
Okay. So you must be dissecting and looking into this budget and finance commission report,
Right.
it's like that. Uh,
You do both. You do industry level analysis and you do macro analysis. So
okay.
you always,
Okay. So I would now take you to some specific avenues
yeah,
which will call upon your understanding in economy. Uh, let's go back to let's say 2020 when we were starting 2020.
right,
Uh, Government enforced lockdown
right,
to control the spread of the novel coronavirus or COVID-19.
right,
So there were two school of thoughts. One was suggesting yes, the government has done right, and the other school said no, lockdown was not necessary because the spread was it did not spread to the extent where it was spreading like Western countries, like we saw in
right,
the initial phases in Italy, then the United
right.
States. Now we are in the month of November. How do you look into this, because your study entails complex choices. Now if I have two choices, now how do you see this scenario? It may not be black and white, or
Right.
could be a shade of gray.
Right.
So how do you see this argument?
Right. Now, here, what I like doing in situations like that is introduce the idea of uncertainty,
Okay.
right? Because, as we said, it's a novel coronavirus, so we don't know how in February or in March, we didn't know how it's going to spread and what kind of impact it's likely to have on human health. There was very little knowledge that existed. Because though we knew we had a couple of months experience in China or other countries in Europe, but we obviously didn't have a complete understanding, or even today we don't really have a complete understanding how does the virus spread and how does it impact human health. So in February, let's say take India as example, we were really sitting with an uncertain situation, and which we also call indeterminate situation, which
Okay.
means no one really has an understanding and there's no possibility of having a complete understanding or a comprehensive understanding because information itself doesn't exist, right? So
True.
if the information doesn't exist, you really can't create knowledge because everyone is going to now only make a assessment of saying this is a possible path it can take, or this is another possible path that virus and its impact on health can be. Right. So in those situations, when you're dealing with an uncertain or indeterminate situation, your only route which is available to us is to create scenarios. Right. You don't have you can't model these situations. You have to look at scenarios saying if this is how it spreads
Mm.
and this is the impact on human health, these are the kind of costs which are likely to emerge for us as a nation or as a society.
Okay.
And are we willing to bear these costs? Is it worth bearing these costs? In scenario 2, we could have saying it'll spread fast, but India's population is fairly young. So the negative health impact the virus can have is likely to be limited because our population being young is likely to recover much faster and the long-term health impact is not going to be too bad. Whereas population in the West is naturally much older. Their weather conditions are very different from us. So the negative impact, either in terms of death rate or in terms of poor quality of life after the virus is, someone has contacted virus, you would expect in the European country or in largely older demographic country to be worse than in a younger demographic country, right? So India, to me, was quite simple, saying since we are a younger population, chances of coronavirus, given whatever knowledge one had at that point in time, impact having a huge negative impact on our health, widespread health conditions in the country is relatively low. Now, if that impact is relatively low, then you start looking at saying, is lockdown the most appropriate option? Or a complete lockdown the most appropriate option? Can I have partial lockdowns where I start isolating? So people who are older, right? You sort of start limiting interactions among them or with them. Or people who work in close quarters, you start saying, okay, what precautions do I need to take if people have to work in close quarters? Right. So you start doing a little more, little greater, try achieving a greater understanding of the health by using the simple principle of segmentation. We use the principle of segmentation in marketing. We've used it for 50, 60, 100 years, right? We use a very similar principle here, saying let's look at which areas, which industries or which part of our society are likely to be impacted badly, and therefore start taking actions on that rather than saying, okay, let's shut down everything and then create a collapse.
Uh, in your assessment, how has been the economic management of the central government during this, COVID-19 and lockdown and unlock phase?
To me, I think our economic management as a country has been relatively poor prior to COVID itself. Right. So it is COVID has only made it worse. We were struggling to grow. We were struggling to grow at least for about 3 years now. Right. And so the COVID, naturally, once we shut down the economy at not even a week's notice. So situations really has led to it's come to a situation where the economy effectively collapsed in quarter 1. Right. That's why we had a nearly 23% decline in GDP in quarter 1 itself. Right. So to me, I think we should look at pre-COVID as well as post-COVID simultaneously to assess, saying, are we making the most sensitive and sensible choices?
Okay.
Because these days I've realized saying it's not necessary that you make sensible choices. It's also necessary that you make sensitive choices. Particularly when you're in governance roles, you have to be sensitive to the plight of majority of people who are going to be left helpless. Right? When you introduce policy or use policy instruments like lockdown, then it is not the wisdom which matters. It's not only the rationale which matter. It also the wisdom which combines sensitivity which matters. Like the whole problem on migrant labor, millions of people just trying to manage on their own. Right. To me, I think from a social economic perspective, that was probably not the wisest thing we did. Where we said, okay, you fend for yourself in some ways. Right. If I had introduced a lockdown which was almost complete, then I needed to make sure that I assist or I provide help to the extent is needed for people who are going to be stranded because they will lose their employment. They won't have enough savings because this is typically a migrant labor. They are poor by nature. Otherwise, they won't migrate if they were rich. So they were living in cities which could be hundreds and thousands of miles away from their homes. For such population to move at short notice when everything has been shut down, would have been more productive for us if we were a little more sensitive to their need.
Okay.
Though policy perspective can always argue saying we don't Corona would have spread much faster if these people were living in cities. But what you didn't realize is that if they have to leave the cities, what happens to them after that?
Okay.
So to me, that's the complex part, and that's where sensitivity matters more than being sensible.
Mhm. Why do you think India has been not growing so much in last 3 years, and why the economy has shrunk so much among major economies of the world? What are the problems or perennial problems in your view?
To me, if I can show you one chart, let me just share. Is my screen visible, Redman?
Yes, I can see.
Right. So if you look at our long-term trajectory, we really don't have any concern. Right?
Okay.
The growth rate, if I look at this nearly now 30 years of growth rate, you see this line is really a positive line growing almost steady and going up. But if I look at last 3 years, which is 16, 17 onwards to 19 and 20, I'm not even taking into account.
Okay.
We've effectively from a 7-8% growth rate, we are now down to about 7% growth rate. From a long-term perspective, there's only a marginal change.
Okay.
Right. So I was at 7-8%, I'm down to 7% or so now. So there's no big concern.
Okay.
Now, if I look at per capita, story is not too bad again. We have almost 2012. If I take 2012 onwards itself,
Okay.
my per capita growth rate has been increasing. It came down to 2.3%, but it's gone up to 6.8%. It's down by another 1%, right? Which is still not bad because overall, universally, if I look at, I have a growth rate of 5% plus, which for a economy of India size is not great number because China has done better with similar size, but it's not a bad number at all. Right? So if I look at this 30-year period or 20-year period, we've not done too badly at all. But if I go to the short-term perspective, sorry, let me just skip this for now. If I look at very short-term, which is last, let me just put up the pen. So from period where GST implementation happened in some sense, right? And I'm not saying GST implementation is the cause, but just using that as a reference, our growth rate has only been declining after reaching a peak of about 8%.
Okay.
Right? We're down to 5% pre-COVID, below 5%. Right?
Right.
And why is it happening? Our consumption growth rate has declined. So which means private final consumption expenditure has been declining. Our capital investment has more or less collapsed.
Okay.
Right? Capital investment in India is 30 to 40% of the GDP. It was 40 earlier, now it's down to about 30, 32. And this is 50 to 60% of GDP. Right?
Okay.
Two of my biggest drivers of growth, I am struggling to grow.
Okay.
Right? Investments have collapsed and private consumption also has collapsed. And government expenditure, while it's reasonably steady, right, but it's not compensating or is not able to compensate for decline here as well as decline here.
Okay.
Right. So our biggest challenge is that we don't even have one driver of growth now available with us.
Okay.
Government is hesitating to spend. Private sector, which is people like us, households are not in a position to spend because we know real earnings in India have not been growing.
Okay.
For the last 3 years, particularly, salary increases have not been the same. Profitability has not been the same for the corporations. And demand is not expected to grow. So therefore, capital investment has also come down. So today, pre-COVID itself, we did not have any sort of large engine of growth.
Okay.
Right. And if today now post-COVID, obviously this is negative, is seriously negative. This is just about positive,
Okay.
right? And therefore, we don't have a choice but for the government to spend.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
If the economy has to recover from COVID impact, we
Mm.
really don't have a choice but for the government to spend and spend fairly significantly.
Okay.
Right. I won't today worry about saying, okay, what happens to fiscal deficit? What will my rating agencies globally think? Because we are, as I said, we are an economy of 1.3 billion, 1.4 billion people.
Mm.
Majority, or like I always say, all of us are hardworking. We
Mm-hmm.
want a better life. We want better life for our children. So therefore, we will continue to be productive if I have productive work,
Mm.
right? And one way to create productive work when private investment has collapsed is
Mm.
the government investment. Or the
Okay.
only way to uh, create work
Mm.
and keep and take advantage of India's younger population, hardworking population, educated population, is that I spend as a government political leadership or administrative leadership. I don't hesitate to spend
Okay.
because if the growth comes back,
Mm.
my revenue generation also will be no problem. If there's no growth, there's no revenue,
True. True.
right? If I'm a businessman and I no make no profit, I'm
Mm.
not going to pay taxes,
Okay.
right? So the only person who will pay taxes is then individuals. And if
Mm.
you burden them with higher taxes, which is what we've done with GST,
Mm.
right? You impact our ability to grow for the long run.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Because if my, let's take petroleum itself,
Mm.
petrol is at the same price when when oil was at $150. When oil is at $50 in
Mm.
India, we pay the same price,
Mm.
right? So what we're really doing is through the taxation, I'm taking money with the government, right? And naturally, that money is coming from the households,
Mm.
right? That 2.5, 3 lakh crore is effectively going away from household consumption to government consumption, right? So
Okay.
in the process, you impact the economy's ability to grow in the long run,
Okay.
right? And if I start getting scared of the deficit, then I'm only compromising further our ability to grow.
Mm. Okay.
So we've really, to me, I think we've compromised our ability to grow,
Okay.
right? That's to me, if I were to just summarize it, saying in India, in last 3-4 years, we've really compromised ability to grow by focusing excessively on deficit and by trying to use indirect taxation for generating revenue rather than saying let growth take place, revenue will automatically get generated.
I see. Okay. Uh, during this era, these unprecedented times in 2020,
Yeah,
government has announced, within quotes, stimulus, so many stimulus.
right,
Um, you know, uh, it has it said that it is trying to put more money in the hands of people so that they can survive, they can spend on essential commodities. But clearly, even by government's own admission, those steps were not enough. Were not enough. Uh, there was, voices within the economists, community, that government should have, empowered common people more by giving them the ability to spend. One economist said, you should, print more currency notes.
right,
I think Bolsonaro's Brazil has done it.
yeah,
uh, you know the prices of the commodities have come down. But another set of economists, they warn that, in the long term this will have negative impact on the economy.
right.
What should, government what government should have done, to manage this crisis so that people can survive, they can spend money on essential commodities, medicines, groceries and all. And going forward, how do you think that government should boost purchasing power? Because there right now, there is sentiment is not positive. People
Right.
are spending only on groceries, medicines,
Right.
perhaps, and also who are renting,
Right.
putting up in a rented accommodation. They're paying rents. They are servicing their debts, loans, etc. But there is no demand.
Correct.
uh, their ability to purchase has come down. So, how to revive this purchasing power? How do you look at it?
So to me, I think first when people say that we had a fiscal stimulus, I think that's a wrong expression to use in our case.
Okay.
Our fiscal component of the stimulus was really very limited. We actually had a financial stimulus.
Okay.
In fact, that's what I'm surprised when a lot of economists also tend to agree with the usage of that economic stimulus or fiscal stimulus. It wasn't an economic stimulus; it was really a financial stimulus. The component of pure economic stimulus or financial or fiscal stimulus was very small, which is Narega allocation,
Hmm.
some amount of increase in wages or prices. So
Hmm.
that was a pure fiscal stimulus where money went into the pockets of individuals or corporates, doesn't really matter, but it went to people. Right.
Hmm.
The balance was saying there is a credit available, go and take more credit. Right. Now, as I mentioned earlier, when situation is uncertain, it's very unlikely that any sensible human being or any sensible business leader will borrow money.
Hmm.
In India, we are conservative by design. The typical Indian is a conservative borrower, right?
Hmm.
So we don't borrow to consume. We borrow to invest for our future, which could be children's education, which could be housing, which could be transport in some ways. Right? A typical Indian doesn't borrow to consume, whereas typical American borrows to consume.
Yeah,
Right?
they.
If you look at the U.S. economy, yeah, right. So now, if I have culturally a country where
Hmm.
people don't borrow to consume, the consumption is never going to be driven by your availability of credit, right? And if I'm facing an uncertain situation, either in terms of my earning or profitability or my job itself, then by offering money to this group of people, there is no way that you're going to kickstart the economy. Right?
Oh,
To me, there is no way. Right? The simple understanding of a society will tell you this society is not going to borrow because it is uncertain about its future. Right? So what we needed was how do you, as you rightly said, how do you get society out of the sentiment
hmm.
saying things are not going to get better. Right? Today, everyone believes the things are not going to get better, and
Hmm.
therefore you keep holding back all your investments, you keep holding back all your even non-essential consumption. Right? So what we need is saying if the government starts spending,
Hmm.
government gives confidence to both private sector as well as households, saying I am there to help. It is my role. It's the government's responsibility. To me, I don't even see that they're doing a favor to us. It is government's responsibility to help the society at a time when the society is in a both economic crisis and as well as crisis of sentiments,
Hmm.
right? And therefore, what you want to do is, I'll make investments in, for example, healthcare, right?
Oh,
I'll make investments in education so that I can reduce the cost of living for a vast majority of people. Because today, India is one of the few poor countries where two-thirds of your expenditure on healthcare comes from individual pocket. Right? You and me as individuals spend two-thirds of the total healthcare money. Government spends only one-third. Right? And healthcare inflation and education inflation has been faster than general inflation.
okay.
Right? So what I would do is, how do I reduce the cost of healthcare? How do I reduce the cost of education? And how do I reduce the cost of transportation? Because India, given our state of development, we spend disproportionate amount of money on private transport,
Okay.
right? Right. And if these three heads itself I pick up, there's enough investments to be made. We don't have adequate capacity in healthcare for sure. We don't have adequate capacity, quality capacity in education. We don't have adequate capacity in public transport, right?
Okay.
And these are typically public goods, and all countries have who have progressed have invested significant amount of money from public resources.
Okay.
So if I was sitting in the government, this is the decisions I'll prioritize, saying, let me invest in healthcare, short cycle. Let me invest in education, again, short cycle. Let me invest in public transport. It's medium cycle, 2 to 3 years, public transportation project can be ready, right? Maybe 3 to 5 years it can take in some cities or some rural context, so that you create more employment in the government system itself or in the public sector system, and give confidence to people saying tomorrow is going to be better than today.
Okay.
If people start fearing that tomorrow is not going to be as good as today, then you don't expect people to spend.
True.
Right? We don't expect people, because Japan has gone through that for 3 decades. Typical Japanese knows that the economy is not going to grow, so therefore they don't even want to spend. And despite the fact they have probably one of the best healthcare system or social security system, still people tend to save.
Okay.
Right? And we don't have a social security system, so therefore you will discourage spending even more.
True. Why didn't government give fiscal stimulus but only financial stimulus? What is your observation? Another public in sections of public there has been some understanding or maybe misunderstanding that what the government has done is right because the government is itself in constraints, because again they have a perception that we are a poor country, we're a developing country, we are not as rich as United States or UK, we can't give. Is it true?
Not true.
Done more?
We can definitely do more. For example, take a policy choice we made last year in terms of corporate tax reduction.
Okay.
Right. That corporate tax reduction was completely misplaced at a time when we knew that investment revival cannot take place.
Okay.
Because in India, the capacity utilization has been running below 70%, and has been running below 70% for some time now. So when I have an economy where capacity utilization is at 70%, and I can import goods and services from anywhere in the world at a much lower cost, because China is world's factory, so you can still get productive capacity of China and keep your costs low. It's very unlikely that any corporate leader who cares for his or her shareholder will make an investment only to save taxes.
Okay.
Right. So that 2 lakh crore odd amount was to me was completely misplaced policy choice. If the same money I had spent in infrastructure, I had spent in, let's say, education, healthcare, or public transport, right, we would have been a much better economy even by now. Because in 1 year, if I spend 2 lakh crores, even with our size being large, it's a significant amount of money because it creates its own cycle. Okay. Because government spends money, it comes to laborers, it comes to construction, it comes to small contractors. They create next cycle of consumption and next cycle of growth.
Okay.
And our GDP to tax ratio has really been stagnant, right? And we're picking up the wrong kind of taxes. We're using more indirect taxes as a percentage of GDP rather than using direct taxes. And indirect taxes typically hurt an average Indian, which is people like you and me, get hurt by indirect taxes, and thereby you kill the ability of the economy to save and grow.
Okay.
Right. So I don't think that's to me, that's an excuse. Right. It's not really a genuine reason where you're saying that India doesn't have the ability to tax its people. We do have the ability to tax people. Because the corporate tax reduction went to some of the most profitable companies in the country. Okay. And those most profitable companies in the country are the companies which don't need to invest.
Okay.
Their business is such, like say consumer product company, their investment needs itself are extremely low.
Okay.
Right. So if I give concessions to companies which don't need to invest, and I believe that the investment growth will happen, it's not going to happen.
Okay. Let me take you to another very implications that we are witnessing. there has been a trade war between China and the US, and now and later this COVID-19 phenomenon. Uh, there has a lot of companies are contemplating to shift their supply chain management out of China into more more other economies, including India and Southeast Asia. So, in your view, what could be you know what are the things that we are going to see in this front? What is your understanding? Will China cease to become the manufacturing factory? Manufacturing hub of the world.
Uh,
How this situation will pan out in coming years?
my assessment is that China uh, will continue to be the manufacturing factory of the world or factory of the world,
Mm-hmm.
and will dominate manufacturing for fairly long time to come.
Okay.
Right. There are two reasons there why I'm saying this. One, China's productivity over last 30 odd years
Mm.
has been about 8%. Their
Okay.
manufacturing productivity has been about 8%.
Okay.
At the same time, our manufacturing, because only other country which can really compete in terms of large scale manufacturing with China is India, because we have large population, they have same size of population.
Okay.
And other two or three countries are Indonesia, Mexico, and Nigeria, 100 plus million countries, Brazil,
Mm.
Vietnam now, Philippines. That's it. We have about 10, 12 countries which are 100 million plus,
Okay.
but there are only two countries with 1 billion population,
Okay.
right, which is China and us. So if I have to match China's scale,
Mm.
only India can match China's scale,
Okay.
right? But if my manufacturing productivity is half of China's manufacturing productivity,
Okay.
then naturally the cost which I'm going to provide to the world of the goods which I supply to them is going to be double of China in that sense,
Okay.
right? By just productivity scale. And two, China's factories have always been built for global demand. So the automation level on those factories
Mm.
has always been much higher than a typical factory that we have in India. So the
Right.
scale and labor productivity or a total factory productivity put together
Mm.
gives China a significant advantage. And unless we can catch up with that in, let's say, next 5 to 10 years,
Mm.
China will continue to dominate the manufacturing supply chains anywhere in the world,
Okay.
because their cost of living is still lower than, let's say, US cost of living or Europe's cost of living.
Mm-hmm.
And if US incomes are not growing, because last 30 years, real median income in the US has not grown.
Okay.
So if US has to keep cost of living for its people low,
Okay.
US has to be dependent on China. US doesn't have a choice.
Okay.
If the world's biggest economy has no choice but to import from China,
Mm.
right? Because real incomes in the US are not going up, right? So China will continue to be a manufacturing hub in that sense.
Okay. Finally, I would like to take you to the real estate landscape. Uh, uh, how do you see this real estate landscape evolving uh, from this pandemic era? What would be what will be the major trends?
That's a difficult one. That's really a difficult one.
It's very
Uh,
difficult, but you know, only person of your stature can at least envision.
I can make an effort. The reason I'm saying that is that one, real estate has been in a slowdown mode for about 7 years. Residential, particularly, has been commercial and residential has been in a slower mode. Office space has been doing particularly well, and we've not had any problem unless the pandemic, like till the pandemic has hit us, right? To me, I think our biggest challenge has been that our cost of land
Hmm.
is disproportionate to our stage of economic development or
Okay.
stage of prosperity,
Okay.
right? We are a lower income country or lower middle income country, if I just take a strict definition,
Okay.
right? But real estate prices, which is land prices in India, are as much as any rich country or some of the richest countries in the world, and that distorts our market. and that distorts a typical Indian's ability to invest in a residential house
Mm.
and typical small businesses' ability to become profitable quickly.
Okay.
Right? Like if we take just an example of hospital itself,
Mm.
30 to 40% of the cost in a hospital is land and building.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Now, if I want to build a hospital in the center of the city, which is the most expensive
Mm.
place, but which is the only accessible place I have, because my public transport is relatively poor if the hospital is built outside the city, right? So I will naturally reduce the potential return for the hospital,
Mm.
right? And you take any business, if any business which has to be closer to the center of the city or central business district or core populated area, the
Mm.
real estate cost is so high that neither business is profitable
Mm.
nor living is affordable,
Okay.
right? And then you push people outside, also the periphery, public transport is poor, so you waste a lot of productive time and travel as a result of that.
Right.
Right? You spend, all of us typically, if we travel, we spend 3 to 4 hours or 2 to 3 hours in big cities in travel. So I think real estate, what we need to do is find ways of making it definitely affordable, both
Mm.
from a business perspective as well as from a individual perspective. Right? If we can achieve that, then obviously there's no reason why real estate won't grow or
Mm.
will not come back to growth.
I cannot let you go without asking this very compelling question. While I was going through your profile, you said you also study, credit-led growth as well as household-led growth. So do you think that we are kind of in a fix because I think after liberalization, 90s, early 90s, we focus institutionally as well as individually on credit-led growth, not household-led growth. Uh, Now, in this unprecedented time, which was very unforeseen for I think most of us, of
Right, all
course,
of
leave alone, leave Bill Gates and all the likes.
right.
We think that we are in a fix because we have taken so much loan, car loans, personal loan, home loans. If we would have bought our houses based on our income and savings, we would have better off. Do you see like that?
That is true. That's really a pure mathematical equation in some way,
Okay.
right? But I can do that only if my real earnings are growing.
Okay.
The biggest problem for India it currently is
Mm.
in last, particularly, let's say if I just take India's growth in 2000, mid 2000 onwards, the biggest driver of growth for India was sixth pay commission, right? If you too young to recall that, so I won't say that if you
It
remember.
was
Sorry, this
six,
is in year 2006-7.
2006-7.
Yeah, that's right. I know that you just too young to recall that, so I'll take you back to that period. The average increase in salaries for the government staff, or therefore for the private sector also and public sector also, was in excess of about 100%.
Okay.
Right? There was a structural shift in the economy, in the wages in the economy,
Okay.
post the implementation of sixth pay commission, right? Which is a 10-year evaluation of saying, okay, we need to adjust the incomes for cost of living. So you give increases you give increases across the board, and the government leads that.
Okay.
And a developing economy has no choice but to do that,
Okay.
right? We want earnings of our people on an average to get shifted to cost of living, because cost of living shifts almost like these steps,
Okay.
right? Even if every 10 years, if I don't make these adjustments, you're
Mm.
really hurting almost everyone in the country.
Okay.
Seventh pay commission took, I think average increase was only about 25%.
Okay.
Right? So if I take CAGR of 25% and a CAGR of let's say 100%, I'm talking about 7% growth in 10-year period versus less than 2% growth in next 10-year period.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So if the real wages for people don't grow,
Mm.
you're forcing them to, and at the same time, cost of living is going up. For example, education cost is going up, healthcare cost is going up, transportation cost is going up, real estate prices are going up, right? If I don't compensate on an average every Indian for these increases,
Okay.
right, I can't hope to get the economy on a growth track.
Okay.
Then you're only going to set hopelessness. You're not going to build confidence in people that they should invest and they should grow. I think we've done that. In some sense, we've introduced hopelessness by not letting wages grow.
Yes.
Or not letting earnings grow.
True. True.
So to me, I think that's our challenge, saying how do you bring in hope? How do you bring in this confidence among people, saying, don't worry, we know your cost of living is going up. We will make these adjustments every 5 years, 10 years, or every year. And therefore, you can go and invest, you can go and spend on yourself, and therefore the economy will grow. Because economic growth is nothing but spending and consumption, or spending for consumption or investment.